And then I realized in that moment something. It doesn't really matter if you really know anything. You just have to speak like you know something. And people will believe you. And I've been doing it ever since.
Welcome to Church of the Rock from Winnipeg. Stay tuned to this week's thought-provoking message from Pastor Mark Hughes.
Well, today I'm going to carry on the series that began a few weeks ago called The Power of the Tongue. Proverbs 18:21, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat the fruit thereof. In other words, our life, the fruit of our life is determined by the words that we speak. That was week one. Last week we talked about the triple threat of the troubled tongue, and it was, complaining and gossip and criticism. And we talked about when you start into those things, you never know where it's going to go, and it has a funny way of coming around to you. I want to tell you this little story because we sometimes think that we're invisible and we can go through life and say what we want. And nobody's going to know, nobody's going to care, nobody's going to hear us. And of course, I have a particular problem with that because I'm a public figure. I'm on TV. I don't know if you know that. And people tend to recognize me in public places, which is bad news for me because I'm not always on my best behavior, which maybe I should be. So when my kids were playing soccer one year, we were up in the northwest side of town. And I don't know anybody up in the northwest side of town, and I'm sitting in the bleachers watching this game. So if I don't know them, then they don't know me, right? Well, that's not exactly 100% correct. And so there I am. I'm sitting in the stands, and there was a really bad call that went against our team on the field. And for whatever reason, I jumped up and started yelling at the ref. And I jumped up and started yelling at the ref, and these are the words that came out of my mouth. I said, "Hey, ref, why don't you do your drinking after the game?" And I'm the only one standing up, and I look, and everybody's looking at me. Everybody in the bleachers is looking at me, and I sit down, and one man about 3 rows up is still looking at me, and he says, "Hey, I know who you are. You're that guy on TV, aren't you?" And I'm stuck, right? But I thought on my feet, and I said, yeah, I'm that guy. I'm John Sauter, the weatherman." That didn't really work, but it was worth a try. So today we're going to talk about this. Who can tame the tongue? And the one who talks more about this than anybody else is James. So we're going to go to the book of James. We're in James chapter 3. I'm going to start at verse 2. And it says this, "For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look also at ships, although they are large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. And the tongue is a fire, the world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among its members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature and is set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so." Wow, he's got a lot to say about this, doesn't he? And let me tell you something about this. This is the longest single discourse on any particular single subject in the whole New Testament. A whole chapter on nothing other than the tongue. I want to tell you who James is for a moment, because sometimes people aren't real clear about this, because the more famous James is James, the brother of John, that we see in the Gospels. But that James was actually executed. This James here is James, the brother of Jesus. This is Jesus' biological brother. And he had trouble believing at the beginning, but he became one of the most devoted followers of Jesus after his death and his resurrection, and one of the most outspoken. And it's fascinating to me that here was this guy that watched his brother, would have watched him for all these years, and then became this follower and worshiping his own brother. I mean, what would you have to do to convince your brothers that you were the Son of God? There's really nothing you could do to make that happen. But in this case, he really was the Son of God, and he convinced James of this. So think about this. James is watching his brother for all of these years. And then he writes this letter, and he draws a conclusion. He said that we all stumble, and we all make mistakes, and we all sin, but he says if a person doesn't stumble in their word, they can actually control their whole body. And see, Jesus was the only sinless man that ever lived, and James observed him his whole life. And he came to this conclusion, that if we can control this thing called the tongue, then we can control everything. We are snared by the words of our mouth. We think that our words are inert, that they don't have any power. Our words have power. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. And you know, here's a story of a little kid. But I want you to think about the words that we speak. How many of you have said things like, I'm never going to get out of debt. I'm never going to get rid of this lousy job. I'm never going to own my own home. And when we speak those things, what happens is we get snared by those words. So what James does is he's trying to convince us of the power of words. And then he gives us some illustrations. And the first one he talks about, he says, we put bits in the mouths of horses so that the rider can control the horse wherever he wants. Now here's a picture of a bit in a horse's mouth, and it's quite remarkable. Is all you have to do, you have a 1,000-pound horse, you get on that horse's back if it's trained, and all you have to do is give 2 pounds pressure on that bit, and it will go wherever its mouth goes. This is a very apt illustration, isn't it? And if you want it to stop, what do? You just pull back even ever so gently, and where its mouth goes, the horse will go. And this is what he says is the power of the tongue. He says how it works. And I mean, to me, I'm thinking, why does that horse do that? Have you ever thought about that? Why does that horse put up with us? I mean, anybody can ride a trained horse. Look at this picture. Check this one out. This is the dog's riding it. That's not a setup. Now, understand this. He uses the word horse, not bull. A bull wouldn't put up with this for a minute, right? You've seen the PBR. I mean, that bull will just as soon throw you off and stomp you to death. And I'm not joking about that. And so we look at this and we see that there is incredible power in our words. And as the horse, as the mouth goes, so goes the whole body. Now, here's where I want to go with this. I want you to think about this because it's also true with the words you speak. And the words we speak determine the course of our life. And even worse yet, sometimes the words others speak towards us or over us determine our course in life. Let me give you a powerful example about that. How many remember from the 1970s a group called the Carpenters? And it was Richard and Karen Carpenter. Here's a picture of Karen Carpenter, a beautiful woman with this incredible voice. And what you may have forgotten is that she died at the age of 32 of heart failure. And the reason she died of heart failure at 32 is she had an eating disorder. She was severely anorexic. And when she died, she was 77 pounds. She literally starved herself to death and died at 32. And people wondered what was wrong with her. Why did she have this eating disorder? Why was she so obsessed with her weight and her condition? And some people did a little research, and they found out the root of this problem is when they were still first breaking through and they were being reviewed by various reviewers, and there was a reviewer wrote this in a magazine, someone that she had never even met and did not know this man, and he merely said this. He referred to her as Richard Carpenter's chubby little sister. And those words stuck in her heart like a barb, and they directed the course of her path for the rest of her life. That's how powerful words are. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. That's what James is talking about here. And see, I want to ask you a question, and I don't want you to tell me what it is, but how many of you can think of something that was spoken over you or to you when you were younger, and it may or may not have ruined your life, I'm not saying that, but to this day, you remember vividly, it's stuck in your heart. How many have something like that in your heart? A word. We all do. Pretty much every single one of us has something that we can remember from our past. And we have to decide what to do with that. Now, I'm going to tell you one of mine, and you're free to laugh at this if you want. It came from my father. Understand he's a smart aleck. I'm not sure where I got it from. And so you'll understand this. But when I got engaged to Kathy, I thought to myself, who's the first person I'm going to call? And I decided to phone my father. And I phoned up my father, and I said, Dad, I got big news for you. I'm getting married. To which he said, oh, well, why should you be happy? I said, you can laugh. But it's funny how I remember that so vividly, that those were the words that came out of his mouth. Now, I proved him wrong. I've been happy. But I don't want you to miss how powerful the words are that seem idle to us, and yet we say these words, and they directly affect people. So that's the first illustration, is the bit in a horse's mouth. And the second one, he says these large ships. He says, even though they're driven by fierce winds, he says they can be controlled by the pilot by this little tiny rudder wherever he wants to go, even in the midst of a big wind. How many of you are sailors? Anybody sailor in the room? Do you have a few sailors? Not too many sailors in the room, but you know what I'm talking about. You can go almost directly into the wind if you tack your sails properly and trim them right and steer into it. It's amazing what a sailboat can do. Even though the wind's coming against you, you can go another way. Last night I asked this question. I said, how many sailors do you have in the room? And this one gal put up her hand. And then she later came up and she said, Pastor Mark, I misunderstood your question. I said, how's that? She says, I'm not a sailor. I'm in sales. I didn't know where you were. She says, I didn't know where you were going with that. I said, it's almost the same thing. It's all good. And so it's fascinating, because here's why it's important, this illustration. Because we're all going to encounter the storms of life, aren't we? We're all going to encounter fierce winds, headwinds, and crosswinds in life. Every single one of you will have tribulation. You will have tribulation in this world, but be of good cheer. World, that's what Jesus. How are we going to deal with the storms of life? And I'll tell you how you'll do it. You'll do it with one of the ways is the words of your mouth. I have a great story about that. When I was 12 years old, my mother sent me off to summer camp. I think she might have been trying to get rid of me, and can't really blame her. I went to Camp Stevens on the Lake of the Woods, and I'd never been there before, and I get in this cabin. I'm there for 2 weeks, and one of my cabin mates was this young boy named Louis. And I was pretty happy to have Louis in my cabin because he was a veteran at the camp. His mother sent him every summer to camp for 7 weeks. I thought, boy, does his mother love him. Or something, right? I know different now. Nevertheless, halfway through the 2 weeks, on the 1 week mark, or at the second week mark, we go on a wilderness canoe trip, 4-day wilderness canoe trip. And so we load up these canoes, and by my good fortune, I got Louis in my canoe, the veteran. I was so happy about that. And here's how it works. The weaker partner goes in the front, you're the bow, and the stronger, more accomplished paddler goes in the back or the stern, right? So he's in the stern of the boat, and I'm in the bow of the boat, and off we go. The first 2 days are perfect. We got clear sailing, and it's sunny, and it's calm, and it's beautiful, and we're having a wonderful time for 2 days. The third morning, we wake up in our tent. It's time to turn around and come back. 2 days out, 2 days back. And so we have to go back, and the winds had come up, and they were contrary to us, and we had this big northwest wind coming right at us, and we had to go straight into this wind. So we start off, and the canoes start going off, and I'm thinking, well, I'm good, because I got Louis, right? I got the, the captain back there, and the veteran. And so we're paddling away, and I'm in the front, and we're getting further and further away from the other canoes. And we're in this big stretch of water, and the other canoes managed to get around out of the wind and around the corner where it was calmer, and they were sitting there waiting for us, and we were right in the middle of this body of water. And so we're paddling, or at least I'm paddling, our canoe's going like this and all over the place, and it wasn't going well. And then out of Louis' mouth, these are the words that came. He said, let's head for the shore. Well, I didn't know why we were heading for the shore, but, he's the captain, right? He's the stern. And so he turns the canoe. Now we're going sideways to the winds. We're getting a crosswind, and it's hitting us like this. And it was fortunate we didn't capsize. I think, why are we going to the shore? I said, where are we going? He says, we're heading to the shore. We're heading to the shore. I thought, well, he must know something I don't know. And so he keeps on paddling, and I keep on paddling. We're about 20 feet from the shore. There's nothing we can do when we get there because it's this big rock face. And I thought, well, we're not going to be able to land this canoe, and I don't know why we're headed here anyway. We get 20 feet from the shore. You know what Louis does? He jumped out of the canoe. He jumped out of the canoe and started swimming for shore. The captain was abandoning the ship. Here I was, I put my trust in Louis, and the guy just bailed out on me. So I'm in the bow of the canoe goes like this, the winds are hitting me, I'm spinning around in circles, he's swimming for the shore. Not a very good swimmer, fortunately, so he wasn't getting very far, and I realized I had to take control of this situation. Somehow I managed to get over to him, and I grabbed him, and I said, "Get back in this canoe!" And I said, "You're going in the bow, I'm in the stern. And we're going to the other side, and we're getting across. You paddle with all your might. I'm going to steer this canoe." And so, by this point, he's afraid of me. And so I'm yelling at him. And so he gets in the canoe, and he starts paddling, and I'm paddling, and I'm steering. These people are waiting for us, and we caught up to the rest of them as they were waiting for us. It was so cool. And then I realized in that moment something. It doesn't really matter if you really know anything. You just have to speak like you know something. And people will believe you. And I've been doing it ever since. Doing it right now, as a matter of fact. So that was the second illustration James uses, and it's important for understanding the storms of life. And the third illustration is this. He says, see what a greater forest a little fire kindles. Or in other words, he's saying, it's interesting how a little spark or a little match, a little flame, can start a forest fire. And we've all experienced something like this. I remember years ago when I was on the farm, and it was in the spring, and we hadn't got the fall work done, and there was all this stubble that I didn't know how to deal with. It was 30 degrees Celsius, and a big breeze had blown up. I thought, I'm going to burn the field off. And a Bic lighter, that's all I had. And I went to the side that the wind was blowing from, and I lit the windrow on fire, and I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to walk to the other side of the field, right across the field. I'm going to light it on that side, and I'm going to back burn it, just like they do in the movies. And it's going to burn to the middle like this, and it'll be a beautiful sight. So I use my Bic lighter. I light the windrow. I start walking like this. I'm not even looking. I look behind you. Well, here's a picture of what it looked like. That's what it looked like behind me. There was 20-foot flames and black smoke 200 feet in the air with the wind blowing against me, and I'm in the middle of the field. How stupid am I? And so I run for my life and get to the other side. Within 5 minutes, that little Bic lighter had consumed that entire quarter section of land. And I looked at that thing, and I thought, wow. And James says, that's the power of your tongue. And that lesson in that field that day was a great preparation for marriage. That's what I can tell you. All you need is one word, and your marriage can look like that. So here's his illustrations. And I mean, James is, I don't know, he seems a little worked up to me, do you think? You look at him and he says, who can tame the tongue? No man can tame the tongue. He says, the tongue is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. He says, the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity, set on fire by hell. I think, man, that's sort of pessimistic. But he knows how powerful the tongue is, and so he's trying to convince us of that, because I think sometimes we just don't get it. So what I want to do in my remaining minutes here is I want to talk to you about how you can tame the tongue. Because I actually think that James knows you can tame it. He wouldn't be telling us all this stuff like you couldn't do anything about it. He's telling us this so we will do something about it. And here's the 3 things that I would give you about how you can control your tongue. Here they are on the screen. Number 1, think before you speak. I know some of you have never tried that, but we're going to try it. Number 2, know when to shut up. Number 3, have a change of heart. So the first thing is this, is to think before you speak. Does anyone in this room know anybody that would suffer from verbal diarrhea, where they just talk and talk and talk and talk? Or any of you that person? Don't put up your hands. Oh, people put up their hands. Is anyone married to that person? No. Quit putting up your hands. Well, quit asking us then. Okay. Anyway, you know these people. They talk and 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 they just never shut up. And think about this, and this is going to be kind of mean, but I'm going to say it anyway. Who's the stupidest person you know? I'll tell you the stupidest person you know is the one that never stops talking. You think, but Pastor Mark, you never stop talking. You go up there, no, I'm delivering a sermon. I do stop talking in between sermons. And so, but you know what I'm talking about. Now that we have these cell phones and Bluetooth, and you see people on the bus, and you see them in the mall, and you see them in the street, and you see them in the airport, and you think to yourself, Who is that person talking to? Nobody wants to listen to all that. And then Susie, she was going out with Tom, and OMG, it was amazing. I couldn't believe it. And she'd broken up with, and she's going on like this and on like this, and I'm thinking, who's this poor sucker on the other end that has to listen to her blather on and on and on? See, this is what the scripture says. It says, the fool speaks his whole mind, but the wise man knows how to hold back. Get it? It says the fool speaks everything on their mind. They don't think before they speak. They just speak, and everything comes out. My favorite, actually, that's Proverbs 29. Proverbs 18 is even more pointed. It says, the fool's lips enter into contention, and his mouth calls for blows. You know what that means, don't you? It means you want to punch him in the face. They just talk and talk and talk and talk because they don't think before they speak. And I don't think the scripture would tell us that we should think before we speak unless it is possible to actually think before we speak. What do you guys think? I think it's true. So I'm going to tell you a little story about this. So when I was a young man, I was testifying at a criminal trial. And the guy on trial was my boss. And I was the only credible witness that actually knew what happened. And I had to testify against my boss. It was fun to testify. I felt bad that he was going to go to jail, which he did. But, you know, still, it was a fun experience. And so first day of testimony, I'm there and I'm on the stand and I'm talking and answering these questions. And then the second day of testimony, the Crown prosecutor came to me and says, I want you to read the transcript of yesterday so you can remember what you said yesterday so you can be consistent today. So I'm reading the transcript of the things that I said in the first day, and I'm thinking, I sound like a moron. And here's why I sounded like a moron. I answered questions with stuff like, yeah, uh-huh, nope. And all of these slang words, I thought, who is this idiot that's doing this talking? It's me. And so I realized I'm not talking like that today. I'm going to improve my speech, and I'm going to think before I say it. So day 2 of testimony starts, and this is what's coming out of my mouth. No, that is incorrect. Yes, that is an affirmative. Those are the facts of the case. And I mean, day 1, I sound like Dog the Bounty Hunter. Day 2, I sound like Spock from Star Trek. You know, how everything's either a negative or an affirmative or whatever. And I realized that we actually can control our speech. We can actually think before we speak. Isn't that sort of a miracle? Whoever heard of such a thing happening? It was funny because this morning I had this gal come up to me and she said, Pastor Mark, that message last week was really hard. You told us we weren't allowed to complain, criticize, or gossip. So I got in the car. I had nothing to say all the way home. I'm not done yet. She says, so then I sat there on the couch and I couldn't think of anything to say all day. And then she says, then I got really depressed. I said, well, praise God, you're getting it. Which brings me to my next point. And that is, we need to learn or know when to shut up. See, sometimes we just need to be quiet, right? A wise old owl lived in an oak. The more he saw, the less he spoke. The less he spoke, the more he heard. Why can't we be like that wise old bird? You all know that, don't you? And it's just a matter of the fact that every once in a while you just need to shut up and listen. You know what Proverbs says? This is Proverbs 17. It says, even the fool seems wise if he keeps his mouth shut. Isn't that right? When we bought this building, we had to get it rezoned because we had to get a variance because this is an industrial park. You can't actually build a church in an industrial park. And so we had this offer to purchase, and we had to go to a hearing. The city planners had actually approved it and said, it's a good idea. We don't actually want you in a retail or residential area because you're a big church. We think an industrial park's a good place for you, but you still need the variance, and you're going to have to go to this hearing. So off we went to the hearing, and it was me and Pastor Keith and Pastor Aubrey, and I was the spokesman because, you know, I speak. And so finally our turn came up, and I went up there, and they said, what do you want to say about this application? And I talked, and I talked, and I talked, and I talked, and when I was done talking, you know what I did? I talked some more. And I just never shut up. And I was talking to, and Pastor Keith and Pastor Aubrey are sitting at the back of the room, and they're saying, why doesn't he shut up? What's wrong with him? Why? He's talking them out of it. Finally, they started praying for me, and they said, oh, Lord, shut his fat trap. Lord, would you shut him down? So they're praying for me like this. Finally, the chairman of this hearing, he's looking at me like this. He says, so are you saying you want to change your application? I went, no, sir. He said, so are you happy with the way it's written here? And I went, yes, sir. He went, fine, approved, bang. And he hit it like that. All I had to do was say, yes, sir. But I chose to go on and on and on and almost talked ourselves out of it. Isn't that crazy? We just need to learn how to shut up. It's like this story of this elderly man. He's been deaf for quite a few years, and finally he goes and gets hearing aids. And after a month, he goes back to the doctor, and the doctor says, how are they working? He says, perfect, I can hear everything. And so the doctor says, your family must be happy that now you can finally hear. He says, no, I haven't told them. I just sit around and listen to what they say. I've changed my will 3 times. So number 1, think before you speak. Number 2, know when to shut up. And the last and the final thing, and really this is the most important, is have a change of heart. You see, there's a little secret in this. When James says no man can tame the tongue, he's not saying it's an impossibility. He's saying in your own strength, in your own way, you're not going to be able to do this. And I'll show you why. It's in Matthew chapter 12, and it's the words of Jesus. And he tells us how the mouth works. And it's verse 34. It says, brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good things, and an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart brings forth evil things. Did you hear that? He said the words that come out of your mouth are actually determined by what's in your heart. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so if you're going to change the way you speak, you actually have to change your heart first. And this is what he's saying. He says, you can't speak good things because you have evil hearts. And if a man has a good heart, he will speak good things. And here's the greatest part of this. When Jesus came and died on the cross and rose from the dead, he came to change your heart. He came to change you from the inside out. He said, I will remove the stony heart, and I will give you a heart of flesh. So maybe we can't tame the tongue, but you know what? We can have that change of heart. And if we have that change of heart, guess what? The words that come out of our mouth will change our lives. And you know, a lot of times when I look at Christians, I hear the things coming out of their mouth, I question what's in their heart. And you know, maybe they've found Christ, but they haven't found the fullness of Christ. They haven't discovered His Spirit and the fruit of the Spirit, and they haven't discovered the Word of God. And if you abide in His Word and His Word abides in you, then you will know the truth. And then the truth shall set you free. And then you have that heart change. And then your words begin to line up with the Word of God. I'm going to close with one final story here today from Scripture. And it's the story of Zacharias and Elizabeth. And so we have this elderly couple, and he's a high priest. And the angel appears to him and says, your wife Elizabeth is going to have a child. His name shall be John, and he's going to be great. He's going to prepare the way for the Messiah to come. Well, you know the story. It's in the book of Luke. What happens is Zacharias doesn't know if he believes it, and he's doubting it. And he says, that can't be. My wife is of advanced ages, and I'm old. We're not having a baby at our age. Who remembers what God did? Shut him up, shut his mouth, and he was mute for 9 months. And after 9 months, this baby is born. The baby comes out of the womb. He's still mute. It's the circumcision on the 8th day. They're naming the baby. The family turns to Zacharias and says, I guess his name will be Zacharias, after his father. And Zacharias takes a tablet, and he writes on the tablet, his name shall be John. And all of a sudden, do you know what happened? His mouth was loosed. Why? Because he got his mouth in line with God's plan. And if he wasn't going to be in line with it, then God just had to shut him up. And God shut him up for 9 months until he had that change of heart, and he believed that what God had said was true, and he declared it. And once he declared it, once it was in his heart and it came out of his mouth, then everything changes. You see, when we look at our world's a troubled place because so many people are negative. So many people are complainers and criticizers and gossipers. And if anything needs to change, it needs to be the church, because we're the ones with the changed heart. See, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat the fruit thereof. You can change your voice and your tongue by taming your tongue, by taming your heart. That's how it works. God bless you. Let's stand together.
The one question a person should ask is, what on earth am I doing here? In Pastor Mark's new book, A Greater Purpose, you will fully realize that we are all here for a divine purpose. This book will help you discover your own personal destiny. You can order a copy by visiting our website at churchoftherock.ca. Order a copy today and begin your journey to finding your place in God's great big space.